This is lesson 1. This is episode 1 of the book of Exodus, and we're going to go through the entire book of Exodus by the end of this seminar / teaching. But we're going to cover chapter 1 and the events of chapter 1 right now in Exodus. You're going to learn some mighty lessons from this book. I learned a pretty good bit, a lot, that I'm able to hold on to, that you'll hear in my messages, just from my preparation of it. The great lessons to learn from the book of Exodus is this: you are seeing the greatest conflict that God has with mankind. We're going to learn how God communicates to mankind, his ways and his laws. We're going to learn about God's promises and also about God's punishments. We are going to learn and see an awful lot about the character of mankind, if we don't know that already. And we are going to learn how God reacts to disobedient mankind and how he rewards or punishes us, of course. We're going to learn some ways of God. Exodus is a story about people finding the strength in a relationship with God to combat the tyranny of Pharaoh. If there's a takeaway from what I have learned so far, just in chapter 1, this is what I have learned: that it is incumbent upon a culture, you and I, in our respective countries, communities, to seek God, fight tyranny, fight evil, and you're going to have to do that with a group of people, whoever they might be, a selected group of people in our land, just like the Hebrews as they were fleeing from Pharaoh, and as God gave them a man, a representative, a voice, Moses and Aaron as well. And you're going to see the conflict that God has with Moses. He had problems with Moses. He had problems with the people. The people had problems with Pharaoh, and they also had problems with Moses. Tremendous stories, but it will show you how God interacts with mankind. That will also tell me and show me how God expects me and us as a community and as a nation to find God, get a relationship with God, to handle the evil that is in our land. Yes, we don't just sit down and say, well, you know what, let's just pray. And I'm not demeaning the power of prayer, and I know you know that, okay? But God did not just say, well, just pray, okay? He had to do something about it. So let's get started, okay? Exodus is a story about people finding the strength in their relationship with God to combat, in this case, the tyranny and the evil of Pharaoh. And we can take that to a lesson about us and our country as well. If you agree with me, give me a thumbs up. What we're going to learn and what we're going to go through in chapter 1 at least is Israel increases greatly in Egypt. The people of Israel, they began to increase. It starts off with the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his own household. We'll read about that. Skipping down to verse 5, and we're going to read the whole chapter, don't worry. But Joseph was already in Egypt. Remember Joseph and how they put him in the well, and he was sold, and he was in prison, and the story of Joseph, and he was in Egypt, and he, through dreams and interpretation, he wound up in the Pharaoh's house, and he was a great influence, and they respected Joseph. And now Joseph dies, and Egypt no longer recognizes and is not, Joseph is not any longer there to assist his people against against evil kings, okay? So Joseph was already in Egypt, then Joseph died, and all of his brothers and all of that generation passed away. And in verse 8, chapter 1, verse 8, we're going to discuss there arose a new king over Egypt. And it says that that king wasn't familiar with Joseph and the story of Joseph. We're going to discuss that and what that means. Then it says, let us deal shrewdly with the people with the Israelites. The king, does anyone know what king that was that took over, that began to give Israelites trouble? It was King. They're pretty sure it was King. Let me just read down to verse 12. It says, but the more they were oppressed, this is what I want to get on. The more that they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. Let me stay on track here. I almost was getting off track and ahead of myself. The king of Egypt then told the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, to kill all of the male Hebrew infants and spare the women. So abortion was taking place, afterbirth abortion was taking place. You see the very beginning of it at that point. It's the way that evil rules. Verse 16 says, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, you ought to kill him. And another note in chapter 1, Pharaoh commands all of his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, he says, you shall cast them into the Nile, but you shall let the daughters live. As we go on through chapters 2 and 3, we'll talk about the birth of Moses. We will talk about, we're not going to cover that tonight, but we're going to talk about God hears Israel's groanings. Chapter 3 is the story of the burning bush. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a heads up on what we're going to be reading. And let's talk about right now, and we're going to begin reading in the chapter in just a moment. So, I'm going to be handling this a little bit different. I'm not handling it like a sermon, okay? So, as we begin to look at the reasons why was it that the Egyptians were so afraid of the Hebrew people, of the Israelites? Why? What was it? You can parallel that as well with some different times in history, but one of them in our day and age would be the story, but what the Nazis done against the Jews up into 1948 with the Holocaust, when a group of people decides that they need to annihilate, genocide, destroy, and kill another ethnic generation of people, and for all of their own reasons. And all of these reasons are spearheaded by an evil leader, whether it be Pharaoh and the Egyptians, or whether it be Adolf Hitler or Stalin in those countries that have done such atrocities. So, we're going to be able to learn some things that took place in Exodus, and we're going to be able to identify and parallel them with some cultures of today, if I teach this lesson correctly, okay, and get to everything. Let's talk about a historian that talked about Pharaoh. Pharaoh, this was a recording. I'm going to read it right now. And Josephus was in about AD 95. AD 95, in that time frame, was when the historian began to write, the Jewish historian Josephus. He wrote the Antiquities of the Jews. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, the Antiquities. Well, in that he is discovered that he wrote about Pharaoh's dream. And let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and read that. It says Josephus wrote about a dream Pharaoh supposedly had, which explains why he wanted the Hebrew infants killed. Pharaoh slept, and he saw in his sleep a balance. And this is not in the Bible. This is what Josephus wrote, okay? It's not Bible. It's not an inspiration of God. It is a historical writing from a historian that wrote about this from the manuscripts that he had, okay? So, you can explain that. Pharaoh slept, and he saw in his sleep a balance. Josephus records, he says, and behold, the whole land of Egypt stood in one scale, and a lamb in the other scale. And the scale on which the land was outweighed it, which was the land of Egypt. He records, immediately he sent and he called all of the chief magicians, and he told them about his dream. He says, they opened their mouths and they said to Pharaoh, a child is shortly to be born, and in the congregation of the Israelites, whose hands shall destroy the whole land of Egypt. Therefore Pharaoh spoke to the midwives. This is the writings of the historian Josephus, okay? One of those sacred scribes, he began to foretell future events. Truly, he told the king that about this time there would be a child born to the Israelites. And if he was reared, and he would bring Egyptian domain low, he would raise the Israelites, that he would excel all men in virtue and obtain a glory that would be remembered throughout all the ages. That's the interpretation of the dream. Which thing was so feared by the king that according to this man's opinion, he commanded that they should cast every male child which was born to the Israelites into the river and destroy it. And if any parents should disobey him, and virtue to save their male children alive, they and their families should be destroyed. And that was Josephus writing in Antiquities. That's the second book of Antiquities, chapter 9, if for some reason you want to look that up or follow that. I wanted to read that to you. And that would further explain the anguish and the fear. They were very spiritual people back then, and people should still be spiritual today, but they were very spiritual, and that dream meant a lot. Interpreters of dreams was a very serious thing back then. So now you see the Pharaoh, you see him scared. He's got a dream. Now this dream is according to Josephus, okay? And you know the famous cliche, let my people go, let my people go. So let's learn about the story of the Hebrew people. Dr. Douglas Headley, he's at the University of Cambridge, and he's a philosopher, and he teaches the philosophy of religion. And coming across what he says, our Bible is the core of culture, whether people want to believe that fact or not. Our Bible brings forth a lot of our culture, our morality, whether people want to say that they are religious or not. He brought out the fact that the temple of Apollo in Delphi, they had a description on it, and it said, know thyself. And it was a good point that he brought out, that Dr. Headley brought out, I thought. Our judicial system is total foolishness. It's an example of how the result of our individual beliefs climbs upward to the ladder of government. I always say, where do our crooked politicians come from? Where do our lawless murderers come from? Well, they come from your home, and you may not say, well, not my home, but understand how I'm saying this. They come from your home and mine. They are our children that we raised. Now, that should be quite alarming. Not pass off. We did not get evil people from Moors. Hitler was born to probably a very, I don't know, I've never studied that, but Hitler was born to possibly a very nice mother. I don't know. There are some serial killers that was born, the mother says, I had no idea my child was this man. I had no idea. So not to hang on that, focus on that much, other than where do know thyself, know who we are. We're going to try and find out who we are by studying the Hebrew people. About morality, he also says that it's not discovered. You heard me say this before. It's not discovered. It is has to be it's not invented, is what I'm trying to say. It's not invented, but it needs to be discovered from a higher power. You heard me say that before. And the perception of reality, as we're going to study the Hebrew children and the Exodus from Egypt, we're going to find out, how does chaos come into order? God's the primary spirit, the head of all order, and it's God's fight against mankind and mankind's will in the book of Exodus. So what we should learn is priority in our lives. If God is at the top of your hierarchy, at the top of your pinnacle, then we must correctly perceive him. Carl Jung says whatever is at the top of your pinnacle, you've heard me say this, is your God. We're going to discover this in Exodus about the Hebrew people. Whoever you put at the top of your pinnacle, that is your God. You can name it anything you wish, but that is your God. People are following something. They are following a concept. Spirit of God or the spirit of mankind. So if you live your life, if your life is not sufficient, then you choose the wrong God and the wrong priority. The highest ethical spirit in which we are beholden is presented precisely as that spirit that aligns itself with the cause of freedom and against tyranny. That's sort of my introductory to Exodus for you, is what we need to learn. So let's begin to read. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 1 through 7, let's see what happens here. Israel increases greatly in Egypt. Here's the names he gives the names of the sons of Israel, who came to Egypt with Jacob, and each with his household. There was Reuben and Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin. There was Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob, there was 20 persons, it says. A little good fact to understand here is Joseph, and you know the story of Joseph, I assume. That was all in the preparation of what was going to start and go before. God knew about this exodus that was going to take place. He was going to have to take his people. See, when Joseph was in Egypt, he took care of everybody. There was nobody, they liked Joseph, and he was their bodyguard. He was their representative. He was their senator, if you want to think of it that way, their governor. But when Joseph died, it says a new king came, and that new king did not know Joseph. So Joseph was already in Egypt. That's verse 5. Then Joseph died, and all of his brothers and all of his generations died. It says, but the people of Israel were fruitful. They increased greatly. They multiplied, and they grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. A new king rises over Joseph. And what we're seeing right here is extreme ingratitude to Joseph, if I would say so myself. forgetting your forefathers, the intent of your forefathers. We find that happening with people that die. I think of great preachers that are no longer here, and because of those great preachers that I say they're great preachers, they're gone, and I miss their preaching. I miss their influence. I can name to you some great preachers that I knew of, and that was international preachers, and their influence is now gone. We do no longer have the influence of the Reverend Billy Graham. If Billy Graham was here and he was invited to the White House and he got up and he said what he would say, I am sure that it would be very important that because of his status, that our president, our current president and lawmakers, at least they respected the words of Billy Graham. He's no longer here. What Billy Graham would say about abortion would have to be listened to because of the unbelievable respect. Well, the respect of Joseph was gone because Joseph was gone. You find this happening with generations and cultures of people. Why? So when someone tells a preacher, a minister of God, watch what you say and you must not preach against certain things, you are contributing to the downfall of your culture. It takes men and women that can stand up, say what is right according to God's word, and take whatever happens. Joseph was gone. So today you can think about it this way. A new president and a new king has risen up in America that forgot the intent of our forefathers. They no longer would speak and say the things that Jefferson would say, or Washington, or Madison. The original 13 colonies of what their intent was is certainly no longer the intent of our culture. Now, I don't want to preach a sermon. I just want to bring out some facts. I've got to watch that I don't get on in my sermon preaching mode. Okay, so Pharaoh, he's worried about the Israel. He had this dream that he purportedly had. Okay, according to Josephus, this dream, it's got him scared. We've got to do something with these people. So what do you do with people that you're scared of in a culture? You oppress them and you suppress them. In Exodus chapter 1, we're going to be in chapter 1, of course, in verse 8. In verse 8. Says, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they're going to join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. And what we're seeing right here at the very beginning of this story of Exodus is a distrust. There's distrust in our nation, to say the least. There is distrust in our government, distrust in our president, sides being taken. And I want you to see how you got to understand that we are ruled and operated by principalities and powers of the air, rulers of the darkness. I see people saying things that I read in the Bible that a demon hollered out. You know, I can't breathe. I'm not, and I don't take this in any political, in the wrong way or anything of that sort. The statement, you know, I remember they were holding this out, I can't breathe. That was the same. How did the demons? What happened to the demons? What happened to the demons that was cast out of the men of Gardenia when they went into the sea? They drowned. They couldn't breathe. They drowned. I see things that Hitler said and Mussolini said in their speeches that is the same thing that evil men said 2,000 years ago in the Bible. It comes from the same father, the same thought process, the same way of thinking. I notice that as I study theologically, God's word. A breakdown of trust. It says in verse 11, therefore they set taskmakers over them to afflict them with heavy burdens, and they built for Pharaoh some cities, Python and Ramesses. The Nazis did the same thing. The Nazis did the same thing with the Jews. Same thing. When they feared the Jews, when they wanted to get them out of their society, they wanted to have a super race. You will find this in cultures, and to the extreme where Hitler wanted to annihilate, of course, the Jews. And they began by putting them in what they call ghettos, then the concentration camps, and then you know the rest of all of that story. In verse 12, as we move along, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad, and the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. And they made their lives bitter with hard service, mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Today, you see people that march in protests and special interest agendas, and this is what happens in a culture. This is what we can learn and see from the exodus of the Hebrew people and what Pharaoh and what Egypt was trying to do. If Egypt was so afraid of the Hebrew people, and they were afraid, if they were so afraid, why did they not just let them go? Why did they want to keep them? Because they wanted to keep them oppressed, keep them as slaves. They wanted to suppress them. And I wrote this comment: a strong people wanting to maintain their strength, and minorities try to gain strength. You will find this in cultures, in every culture, in every land. Very seldom do you find a culture in a land where everybody just gets along and they're all on the same page. In Exodus, what we see in Exodus is a struggle with God's will and the will of mankind. God's fighting his will upon the Hebrew children, upon the Israelites. He's fighting his will and trying to get Moses to listen to him and quit arguing with him. And of course, there's the conflict between God and Pharaoh and the pawns, or the Hebrew children. So we see a struggle with God's will and the will of mankind, each trying to impose a belief and superiority. So here's a question for you. Who do you think, when it comes to the conflict, of God's will and your will and mine in mankind, who do you think is going to win out? Does anyone know the answer to that question? Who do you think is going to win out? There's a few tyrannies here. An external tyranny, that Pharaoh, and there's an internal tyranny that people have to fight, and that is your moral or immoral self. You fight against the things that happen to you in this world, evil people that keep you down, those that don't want you to advance, those that want to take from you and pad their own pocketbooks. So you have to fight with that, and then you also have to deal with your relationship with God, and that's why people go to the doctor and say, I need something for my nerves, You have to deal with life. Pharaoh, you have to deal with yourself, God. And one thing about that you can certainly write in stone, and that power produces corruption. And slavery, when slavery exists, it corrupts the slave as well as the master. Let's read verse 15 out of Exodus. Let's read verse 15. The king of Egypt says to the Hebrew midwives, why did he ask the midwives to get involved? Wanting to involve the women. I wonder why. There's a great move, of course, across the world, and in the United States, the women's movement, of course. Okay, so I want you to parallel these things. The women getting involved in this, doing the dirty work, if I could put it to you that way, okay? Doing the dirty work of the tyrant. Women, don't let tyrants make you do their dirty work. Don't make you politically, morally, ethically do the dirty work of Satan. And I think that that is quite a mouthful. It says, then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Sephora, and the other was Puna. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. P-U-A-H, Pua. When you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stool, now I read a little bit about this, okay? And they sat in a chair, they had a hole in the middle of the chair, and they sat down and they gave birth, is what I read, okay? They didn't lay down, they did it that way. For whatever that FYI is worth. When you serve as a midwife and you see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, kill him. But if it's a daughter, she shall live. And here's a very important thing, ladies, women, and men, but ladies, since evil men get you to do all of the dirty work, okay? Verse 17 says, but the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. You're not going to get a moral, decent, godly woman, fears God. You're not going to get her to kill an infant child. Unlike so much of our country in the United States of America is doing today. The fear of God's brought to the surface, okay? The fear of God. The midwives feared God. Let's skip down to let's move on to verse 18. Some important points with what was going on. You've got a conflict right now with a government, a king that's afraid of an ethnic group of people, howbeit the Hebrews, okay? Gets the women to do the dirty work. So the king of Egypt called the midwives, and they said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? Why have you done this? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. We're not like them. For they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife even comes to them. They're pretty smart. So God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. Verse 21. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. He blessed them. You will always get a reward for standing up for God. I think that would be the way that I would coin this part of chapter 1 in Exodus. There's always those certain few people that is going to stand up and say, nope, I am not going against God. There's always a few, but let me tell you what, that probably is you, right? That's probably you. You are the one that says, no, sir, not me, not me. But when you say, no, sir, not me, be on the side of God. Who do you want to please? Whose side do you want to be on? Pharaoh or God? Whose side do you want to be on? The politicians, the left wing or whatever political party that has you do things against God? Or will you be on the side of God? Choose Pharaoh or choose God. It says, then Pharaoh commanded all the people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast him into the Nile, but ye shall let every daughter live. So I've got a question right here, and I've marked it right here, and it says, who should fear God? The midwives feared God, and guess what? Pharaoh feared God as well. Pharaoh's dream is recorded by Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews. They had an abortion issue way back then, and it seems like I said a little bit earlier, you can look at the issues that took place when evil was definitely raising its evil head, okay? The same things, the killing of babies, killing of unborn babies. It always was an evil issue. And if you want to know, if you're just wondering and you have no clue, I got to quit, not preach here, okay? I got to teach you something. If you have no clue about right or wrong, which is impossible, I will tell you this much. All throughout Exodus, all up into the birth of Jesus with Herod, into right now in the United States of America, anytime there was the killing of babies, infants, and in our case, unborn babies, I can tell you this much. It was always something that was evil in God's eyes. Was always something that was evil, and an evil man made the decree. So, when you go to vote, keep that in mind. All right? Abortion issue way back then. The tyrant is empowering women to kill men. I got to be careful not to preach. I don't want to preach to you right now. I want to talk about Exodus. Am I doing okay? I'm not trying not to preach, okay? The tyrant is empowering women to kill men, and he's kind of feminizing the culture, believe it or not. Exodus is a story about people finding the strength in the relationship with God to combat the tyranny of Pharaoh. There is a cross-country observation here, I believe. A cross-country observation. Cross-culture observation here, all right? The Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, okay, the Torah, it doesn't shed, it's the 5 books that doesn't shed a good light on Jews. It gives a better portrayal of non-Jews than Jews. Now, of course, in the most parts of it, there was not any Jews, but what I'm trying to say is, it was not books that was written to praise Israelites or the Jews, for whatever that's worth. It shows non-Jews negatively. Noah is a non-Jew, but of course there wasn't any Jews at that time. Moses' father-in-law, he was a great advisor to Moses. He was a Midianite priest. The daughter of Pharaoh, she was a non-Jew, and she saved Moses. And probably, I think that the midwives was part of that pattern, sort of. God is, and I got to say this slow so you can understand what I'm saying. God is ethical, ethics-centered, not ethnic centered. Right is right and wrong is wrong. Godliness is godliness. Ungodliness is ungodliness, no matter what the color of your skin is or what your last name is. So, let's talk about right now what becomes obvious in Exodus. And that is, whoever you are, knowing that something is absolutely wrong. There are some things you could argue about, but other things that you know is wrong. In the Nuremberg trials, when they was going to, when they was going to punish the war criminals, Joseph Mengele was one that got out of their grasp, and many others. Eichmann. They were held regardless of any other ethic. It was because what was done was bluntly and blatantly wrong in the eyes of anyone that had a soul. To do that to people was wrong. And so the whole world, at least finally, said this is wrong. No matter what religion you was, that was wrong. Is what the Nazis did was wrong, then the world had identified evil and they defined it. So let's look at it this way. Let me see if I can get you to think a bit. If or since what the Nazis did was blatantly wrong, evil to the hilt, then the world identified evil and they defined it. Now, defining evil or admitting that it exists is also admitting that good exists because it's in comparison. Any good and bad, always good and bad will fight each other. We have a struggle. God, the Hebrew people, Pharaoh, the side of ungodliness. Anything other than God. So now society, what is good and bad, and who is good or bad, godly or ungodly, will always fight. So here's what I have to say and I don't mean this physically, but we will always be at war against the ungodly. If you could have what you wanted in this life, what would it be? 90% of mankind wants the pleasures of sin, but they also want the blessings of God, and it doesn't materialize that way. There was a point when the Israelites told Moses, they told Aaron, we wish we were back as slaves with the Egyptians, because we think that we was just as good with them than being here in this desert. Is one of the things that they said. 90% of mankind wants the pleasures of sin, but also wants the blessings of God. It don't work that way. All the talk about rights and freedom is just hiding a more fundamental will to power and to oppress. They may say freedom and goodness and all these things, but it is just a front to our government and those evil in power that are evil, that are ungodly. They're not trying to give you freedom. They're trying to control you. The theists are confronted with the problem of evil. Then atheists are confronted with the problem of good. Good people have problem with bad people. Bad people have problems with good people. Hitler's Battalion 101 Code Police, they initially were haunted with their actions of killing innocent people. Then they eventually became determined that they were doing good. Your conscience will get to you in the beginning, but after a while, it won't. You will justify sinful acts. So let's refocus the lens here just a little bit. Let's refocus the lens. Exodus is focusing on a battle of will between good and evil, God and Pharaoh, Moses and the Hebrew people. The Egyptians were going against the rulings of here's what would happen. I was reading a little bit about on this. Being a slave was not considered an evil thing or a bad thing. There was always a ruling faction, and the subservients, there was always slavery. However, the way it worked was after 7 years, in Egypt, you was to be released. You was no longer a slave. You did not no longer have to work for, we would call it in today's terms, the government, and put your time in, for only 7 years. But they refuse to let them go after 7 years. That's just kind of, so you can get an idea of how they looked at slavery and what was going on. Then it turned into something more evil, more drastic, and of course that's what evil men do. You might have noticed that a lower social order of people always work for the hierarchy. I don't care how you want to look at it. How many times you say, well, I'm going to work to slave. Somebody, no matter what you call them, is going to write your paycheck, and you're going to do something for them for that paycheck. Now, that's not slavery, but you understand. I want to talk about in the ending statements here, in the ending statements of this lesson, number 1, and it's this. We're recognizing absolute good and absolute bad, and people that are of godly. Put yourself in the category that's appropriate for you, okay? See your world appropriately. There's always going to be an evil somebody or something, and there's always going to be a handful of somebody or something that's going to be good. We're seeing people that have to fight against evil. And how do you change your situation? How does oppressed people, minority people, the weaker people, the one without the strength, without the power? By the way, that's the ones that's always in God's focus. God chooses his people. He's on their side, and he loves nothing more than taking an army of 32,000 people, breaking it down to 300 people, and beating an army that had 32,000 people. I'm referring to the story of Gideon. God loves to do that. It's the way God works. Who are you? Who are you? You fight against government, you fight against evil. Don't you think that we are not, in this United States that I live in, don't think that we're not fighting against a Pharaoh. Do you think we're fighting against Pharaoh? I think that we're fighting against Pharaoh. I think that there is a government. I think that there is a coup. I think that there is a group of people that are headed by satanic influence to oppress another group of people. Christians right now are being hated. They are. They hate Christianity. They hate godliness. They're passing law after law after law to put down any involvement and any representation of Christianity in a government forum. They are. So we are recognizing what. All right, let me just cut to the chase here. When you look at a crucifix, when you look at a cross, why is it that people wear a cross? Every time you look at a cross now, you're going to think of it differently. Why do people wear a cross? Because when you look at the cross, that is the symbol of, it's a focus on what was the worst bad that was ever done against something good. You hear what I'm telling you? It was the worst bad that was ever done against something good. The cross. You look at the cross. They killed the Son of God, who done no one any. He would come here to help people, to be kind to people, and he is killed and he is tortured. So when you look at the cross, which is the reason I flew to New York to meet Hadassah Rosensaft, who looked the devil directly into the eye. She seen the devil himself. I wanted to see what was the most evil thing that I could possibly see myself. You cannot write bad if you don't ever look at it. Now that's just me saying that. That's just my theory, my philosophy. You can't fix anything that you have not seen. You can't kill an enemy that you know nothing about. Show me my enemy so I can slay him. Show me bad so I can preach against it. Show me a culture of people that are going wrong so I can right them. The cross is a focus on what was the worst thing bad, the worst wrong ever done to good. So we wear that cross. And that tells people that I am on the good side. Come hell, literally, or high water, I am a Christian, like Joshua says, as far as me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua would have wore a cross. A cross means you take the side of good. So when we look at the Hebrew people, we are looking at people. And I want to get the philosophy of chapter 1, okay? People that are oppressed. You are seeing God's conflict with mankind and trying to show mankind. You are looking at the greatest physical and spiritual fight in the recordation of fight and evil in the Hebrew people running away from the evil in this world. And the only way that they can succeed is God on their side. Take note of that. So I'm going to end right here in verse chapter 1. Jerusalem's politics right now, if I could throw that into the mix just a little bit real quickly. Jerusalem right now, as I listen to the Jews right now in Jerusalem, there's a lot of conflict happening in Jerusalem right now. A lot. And their democracy, they said, you're not going to fool us. So many of them, they've said this. This is what they're saying. Our democracy, they fooled us with democracy because all we did is we voted in tyranny. We voted in our freedom of democracy, voted in the evil people. And that's not the way we're going to let it work. And that's why they're marching in Jerusalem right now, today, right now. They're marching in Jerusalem every day, right now. You tricked us by having us vote in evil people to lord over us, which is exactly what has happened in the United States of America. We voted in people that lord over us. Anytime, this is getting off topic here a little bit, kind of, but anytime that you are against everything that happens in the judicial system, We got people that blatantly killed people that they're still walking the street, and they a big old argument over right and wrong. The judicial system that's another sermon. The Jewish people feel that their democracy process actually voted in a tyrants. So, in Exodus chapter 1, we sort of can see what evil looks like, who is evil, and how do people handle evil. And when the only one they can turn to, now think of your life now, is God, of course, is God. You are going to have to find God to fight the evil that is in your world. You can see it in Exodus. You can see it in the struggle of God with his people. And think about that. So that's the lesson I think that we can learn in chapter 1. And I'm going to go ahead and end right now, okay? Give me some comments if you want. Give me some suggestions. I hope that this lesson 1 has, if I'm going in the right direction for you on it, okay? I'm going to be reading the scriptures, and I'm going to be talking to you, and I'll grab my resources from very, very, very resourceful men in their thoughts and their ideas and their philosophy and their wisdom on what they see in a godly manner, in an educational manner, in a resourceful manner, what they see taking place with the Hebrew children, their conflict with God, and how we parallel that with the conflict that we have today. Because I'm going to tell you what, it's the same God, I'm going to end on this. It's the same God that we're dealing with in our evil society that the Egyptians and the Hebrew people dealt with thousands of years ago. It's the same devil that we fight today in America with God on our side that the Hebrew children fought when they was having the conflict of evil and tyranny. Same God, same devil, same warfare, different players. Okay? So, I hope you've learned something. Give me some comments. Let me know if I did a good job. Okay? If that's helping you, because we've got a lot of more chapters to go. And I don't care how long this takes me, but by the time we're finished the book of Exodus, I hope that we're going to learn an awful lot, including myself. Okay? So I'm going to end this, and we're going to go to God in prayer. I thank you for dropping in. Okay? Thank you for dropping in episode number 1 in Exodus. Conflict, God and mankind. All right?